In the episode The Devil You Know, we met the psychotic identity thief called Miss Mercy. With savage guile and ruthless intelligence, she moved from one face, from one life to the next. And she did this for years, until being apprehended by the Department of Restricted Operations. On the night of the Long Knives, she returned. Miss Mercy was the mastermind of the bloodbath and mass escape at the asylum in Grace, Michigan. In both instances, her actions have been nothing short of sadistic. And it would seem this woman is deplorable, contemptible, indefensible. But there is so much more to her story than you have seen so far. Tonight, we revisit the 3 most important moments in the course of her life to give you a fresh understanding of this woman and a new perspective on the creation of evil. This is 3 conversations in the life of Miss Mercy.
Drinking whiskey in the kitchen and telling scary stories around the fire. Music, monsters, and mayhem, killers, cannibals, and cults, fearful fiction and furious fact, tall tales, and terrible truths. This is a scary home companion. The girl, and she was a very young girl, had been raised by a small but fervently devout cult in the middle of an endless sea of trees. It was the only life that she had ever known. If the girl had ever been given a name, no one had bothered to tell her what that name was. She had been left in the charge of an older woman who was missing one of her arms. Mostly the children stayed in the back of the great building, behind the trophy hall, where they were taught lessons. It was her and a handful of other older kids. The girl was the youngest of the group by a margin of years. So the lessons didn't land with her so much. She was still too young to comprehend. The lessons always revolved around a woman called the Skin Weaver, and the ways that they could pay tribute to this ancient and powerful deity. When they didn't have lessons, they worked. And when they weren't working, they slept on thin mats on the floor of a room that they all shared. The older ones, the boys, would torment her in the darkness. She fought them at first, and then she learned to submit physically. But in her head, she escaped. She would sit on the ceiling and watch everything unfold below her. The girl understood that she was alone and surrounded by predators. She did what her instincts dictated to survive. This was a very small compound. The great building and several smaller outlying ones out in the middle of this vast Oregon forest. There were a great many adults, but they were all kept separate from the children. It was the charge of the one-armed woman to protect them from the adults and keep them secluded, to teach them the ways until they were old enough. The girl had not yet spoken a word. She watched, she listened, and she recognized that look on the face of the grown men whenever they saw the children. It was the same look that the older boys gave her, but hungrier, more dangerous. One night, the girl was awakened by the one-armed woman. The other children were still asleep on their mats. Silently, the woman spirited her away to the trophy room. She put the girl in one of the trophy racks and wrapped her in the skins of the fallen. She put one finger against her lips. Shh. And then pressed it to the girl's lips. Shh. And then she went away, out the front of the great building. Moments later, gunfire. Shouts, screams, tires on gravel, boots on skulls. Beams of light cut through the darkness, and the girl hunkered down, wrapped herself tighter in those skins, but she never stopped watching. She saw soldiers in black, carrying big guns, moving past her through the room and into the back. The other children were crying and begging, but mercifully, not for long. A handful of gunshots, and then the soldiers left without looking in her direction. The girl stayed in the trophy closet, wrapped in perfectly tanned human skins. She slept there and stayed hidden through the night, the next day, and into the following night, until finally she realized that the one-armed woman was not coming back for her, that she was completely alone. She slipped out of the skins and went to look at her old mat on the floor, the only thing that was hers. It was spattered with blood. All the other children were still splayed out on their mats, left laying where they died. The girl found herself relieved. She went through the great building and outside into the daylight. She found all of the adults on the ground, just like the children. Many had been shot, some had been bludgeoned or stabbed or burned. They all had been left where they fell. Vultures were gathering. The girl heard growls in the trees as animals smelled rotting meat. And she felt relieved because she was completely alone. This was not a child with a concept of happiness. She had known only work and pain and suffering. That she was now completely alone was the greatest blessing that had ever been bestowed upon her. Being surrounded by corpses and wild animals did nothing to diminish this newfound peace. She found the food supply. She found water. In one of the cabins, she found a TV and a box of videotapes. They were videos made by the cult members of their therapy sessions. Not exactly Ozzy and Harriet, but she watched them anyway. It was the closest thing she had to company. weeks passed. The girl was going through the trophy room, looking for anything new to distract her, when one of the skins on one of the racks caught her eye. This was a full skin, a human suit, if you will, with only a slit down the middle from throat to crotch, otherwise perfectly intact. It was from a woman with long, curly red hair and a strawberry birthmark above her left eye. The girl remembered that birthmark. She went back to the cabin with the skin in her hand and found the tape that she was remembering. At this point, she'd watched all of the tapes dozens of times. She knew exactly which one it was. This woman was talking to the camera, telling it about herself. The girl listened to the woman talking while looking at the skin of her face laying on the table. And then she rewound it and watched it again. The 5th time she watched it, she wore the woman's skin like a suit and repeated her words after she said them. The 15th time, she tried to imitate the woman's voice. It was fun. She felt like a different person. Well, she felt like a person. To be someone, she needed to be someone. The girl didn't exist. And maybe it doesn't make sense to you or to me. This girl was so young, could only been 5, maybe 6. And it made sense to her. She was a nothing, but when she wore this woman and spoke like this woman, she was somebody. Over the next few months, she found more skins that matched up with the tapes. And she wore their faces. She tried to imitate how they spoke, how they moved, how they twitched. When she really studied the details, they were all so very different. Time passed. Vultures and wolves had long devoured the dead. The girl lived in a world of only skins and tapes until they came back. She heard them coming, a fleet of vehicles crashing through the woods. It didn't scare her. Nothing scared her. But she was cautious. She went into the trophy room and she hid amongst her favorite skins, the ones she knew most intimately. The vehicles arrived. Boots crunched on gravel. And they entered the building. Different soldiers this time, with smaller guns. And with them, a stern-looking woman. The girl had seen this woman's picture. She'd seen it many times. She didn't know who this woman was, but she knew that the older people in her group had revered her. The soldiers searched the room. The woman watched. The girl hid. She didn't flinch when the woman approached her. The woman touched some of the skins reverently, smiling to herself, but then noticed the cowering child. She snapped her fingers, and armed men appeared on either side of her, aiming their guns at the girl. The woman said, "Who are you? Tell me. If your tongue isn't good for talking, I'll cut it out so you can play with it like a toy. Little girls need toys." On instinct, the girl repeated the words that she had heard spoken by the person who had previously worn the face that she had on. She quoted the tape. "This just gives me a sense of community. I love it here. Thank you for taking in someone like me." There was a long pause as the woman stared at her, and then she laughed. "Holy shit! You've gone feral, haven't you, girl?" The woman dismissed the armed guards. She bid the child come forward. "Take that off," she commanded. The girl stripped off the skin and stepped forward naked. "My name is Lila. What's your name?" The girl shook her head. "You don't have a name?" The girl shook her head again. "How long have you been out here?" "It's been 8 months." She turned her head. "Cooper, when did we pull the plug on this site?" Cooper confirmed that it had been 8 months. "I came out here to collect some things that had sentimental value before we torched the whole place. I can't believe it's been 8 months. Jesus, what a thing you are." Lila Ambrose marveled at this child, this engine of survival, this perfectly adaptable machine. She led the girl out of the building by the hand, where they stood side by side and watched as the soldiers burned everything to the ground. When the last wall had fallen and the black smoke had started to thin out, the soldiers piled back into the vehicles. Lila knelt down next to the girl and looked her in the eye. "I should really let them kill you. That's the smart thing to do. But I like your chutzpah, and I remember your mother. So today, I will show you mercy." She tousled the girl's hair, got up, and walked away. "You've got the right idea, kid. Never let them see your true face." Lila got into the car, and everyone left. The girl was left naked and alone amongst smoldering ruins. It was 2007. For years, she stayed moving, from face to face, identity to identity, from life to life. It was the only way that she felt comfortable, by constantly shedding her skin. Metaphorically speaking, of course. The only way that she could enjoy anything was through someone else's perspective, because she had none of her own. The woman had been called an ever-changing roster of names over the years, but always thought of herself as Mercy. That came to a crashing halt when she ran into the Department of Restricted Operations. The DRO had recruited her newest persona as a consultant on bringing in the heinous villain, Gordo the Clown. But it had been a setup. They were recruiting her, not her persona, a way to test her in the field and gauge her abilities before they arrested her and put her in a cell. Solitary confinement. For the first 2 weeks, she was taken out of the cell every day in full shackles into the med unit. Every day for 2 weeks, she got brain scans, chest scans, full body scans, like they were looking for something hiding inside of her. Bill Handel was the name of the agent who had brought her in, and he was the only one allowed to speak to her. She refused to say one word to that man. For weeks, bleeding into months, Bill Handel would come by often to ask her questions, but she never answered one of them. After a while, he stopped asking. He still came, but just to watch her. She had expected a full battery of psychological tests, but they never came. Just the same man, the same calm, emotionless face. One that eerily mirrored the blankness of her own expression. "We're two of a kind, aren't we?" Bill would say to her when he left. One day, there was a new face. A priest. He sat down across the cell from her and he smiled. A genuine, warm smile. "My name is Francis. Frank these days. Can I call you Mercy, miss? That's the closest thing to a name we have for you." She said nothing. "I'm Bill's partner. Agent Handel, I mean. His name is Bill. We work together on special cases. Not yours for some reason. Until now." She said nothing. "Why now? Well, I'm just guessing here, but I think he believes you hate him enough to talk to anyone else. He thinks he's got you figured out. He thinks by talking to his partner and not him, that maybe you would think you're sticking it to him in one of the only ways that you can. Which is true because, let's face it, you don't have much by way of options these days." She softened. She looked at him, doe-eyed, like he was her savior, and said, "Really, mister? Okay, I'll tell you everything." Rourke said, "You will?" "Fuck no, old man." And then she stopped responding to him, stopped looking at him, and after a while, Frank Rourke went away. Then she got a new doctor. A middle-aged woman with short hair and thick glasses. This doctor didn't introduce herself. She didn't speak. She came with several guards and inflicted hell on Mercy. Not physical abuse, punishment, pain, anything like that. Mercy was immune to that. The new doctor believed that for a woman who lived in other people's skins, The worst torture she could suffer was being locked into her own mind. So the doctor had Mercy blindfolded, gagged, bound, with her ears plugged. For an entire week, she was kept like that, fed through an IV drip, turned once a day so that she didn't get bed sores. She was left there, in the dark and the silence and the empty of her own head. A week later, the doctor returned. She sat Mercy upright, and the blindfold and earplugs were removed. She said, "My name is Dr. Williams. I think we have a lot in common, Mercy. And in truth, I have a lot of respect for you. So I'm not going to try and trick you or manipulate you. I will be honest. The next time I come back, I'll take out the gag so that we can talk. But we will need to talk. Because if we don't talk, after that, I won't come back again. And after that, you stay here like this until we decide to kill you. I just needed you to know that I was serious." The doctor left. The earplugs and blindfold were replaced. And this time, Mercy was left in the darkness for 3 weeks. As promised, when Dr. Williams returned, it was for a proper talk. Mercy was taken from her cell by armed guards, allowed to shower and put on clean scrubs. She was given food and water. When she returned to her cell, Dr. Williams was waiting. "Are you ready to talk?" she asked. Mercy nodded. "Good. Can you tell me why you are here?" Mercy said, "I made a mistake. I got ahead of myself. I got distracted by the future, and I didn't stay in the present." The doc made a note. "Good, good. But that's not why you're here. That's why you got caught. So, why do you think you are here?" I don't know where I am." "Well, you're not dead. You're not in jail, at least not the type of jail you're accustomed to. You're being kept in good health, and you're being pressured through increasingly drastic means to talk openly with me. So, why do you think you are here?" You want to learn from me," Mercy said. "Or learn about me, understand me." Williams nodded enthusiastically. "I knew you'd understand. I hesitate to say this. But at the same time, I feel it's important to establish some level of trust between us. So, please, trust me when I say that my word, the stroke of my pen, is the only thing keeping you alive right now. Trust me when I say that we are not being recorded. My security clearance guarantees that. Trust me when I say that I see a lot of myself in you." Mercy was, above all else, a good judge of character, and right about then she realized the doctor wasn't interested in listening. Not at the moment. She wanted to be heard. I trust that you're telling me the truth right now, Mercy said. That's excellent, Mercy. Can I call you Mercy? Miss. And the doctor had a tight-lipped smile. Very good. Dr. Williams and Miss Mercy. Sometimes, when stripped of all else, we must stand on ceremony, right? The doctor put down her notepad. Why do you think that you are here? Mercy said, because you allow it. Very good. I told you that I saw myself in you. Have you ever heard of Dr. Catharsis? Sure, Mercy said. She had read about this briefly in the papers some years back. Mercy was a ravenous reader, particularly when it came to news and current events. She repeated from memory. 4 people dead, 1 murder, 3 suicides. All of the suicides mentioned Dr. Catharsis before dying, but no one ever found out what that meant. The doctor couldn't help but to smirk. Catharsis, and that's with a K, by the way, not the way that we spell it today in this country. Catharsis was a philosophy of being able to literally cleanse all of the negativity from yourself, to expel it from your mind and your body. Hate, fear, anger, prejudice, traumatic memory. It's possible to alleviate these things. Or so I thought at the time. My idea was not original, but my technique was. Conditioning, subliminal influence, hypnosis, and a mild drug regimen. To put the patient in a state of catharsis, and then they could cleanse the negativity through one symbolic, often violent, act. And I was close. I was so very close. The doctor looked a little wistful. I didn't mind the losses. I knew the process had kinks that needed to be worked out. That's part of every process, isn't it? Trial and error. And the local police were clueless. No, I'm sorry, I take that back. They weren't clueless. 2 of the suicides happened in their interrogation rooms. That was a fail-safe post-hypnotic suggestion that I had built into all my patients. One that worked beautifully, might I add. When they said the name Dr. Catharsis out loud, it triggered the buried suicide suggestion. So it happened right in front of them. The police weren't clueless. They were just hateful and stupid. I was an obvious suspect. I was the most obvious suspect. I connected to all of them, but I was never even questioned because of my sex, because of the color of my skin. My plan at the time was to let the investigation die down and then continue. But then I met Agent Bill Handel. Yeah, your friend. But he wasn't there to arrest me. He was there to offer me a job, to come and work for him, for the DRO. And they tested me to make sure that I would be loyal. I passed those tests, Miss Mercy. And they gave me a job doing what I always wanted to do. The DRO funded my research. They removed the constraints of law. They gave me test subjects that no one would ever miss. Like you, miss. You see, the DRO is a very special place. They understand that to beat the bad guys, to keep the citizens safe, you have to be the bad guys. Sure, you can try and deconstruct them and understand them and take them apart mentally and physically. But sometimes it's just easier to hire them and let them do what they do best. So, with all of that in mind, why do you think you are here? It was the night of the long knives. The culmination of a project Miss Mercy had been working on for some weeks now. A project she had been assisting with, to be more accurate, because it wasn't her project. It was the brainchild of Dr. Williams. Mercy was just the tool used to implement the plan. And she pulled it off flawlessly, releasing the other prisoners discreetly, coordinating the slaughter of staff and guards, the people that Dr. Williams had labeled as expendable and left behind. And then the other inmates started to leave, one by one, drawn by the smell of unspilled blood in the quiet, cool Michigan night. Razormouth, the lovers, Obadiah Moncrief, the machinist, Gordo the clown, they'd all left. And after reclaiming his battered old Halloween mask, Ben Burrows was ready to go too. "You remember what we talked about, girl," Mercy said to young Emily Mason. The little girl gave her a big hug around the thighs and said,
"I'll miss you. Bye."
Finally, the Southern gentleman was the last to saunter away, off to find a road and a ride. Miss Mercy was left all alone in the asylum. Well, aside from the thing in the basement. Mercy was quite disappointed that the federal marshal, whatever her name was, had fallen silent so soon after being dropped into that basement. Mercy had that woman pegged as a survivor, a fighter, and usually she was a very good judge of these things. But all fall down in the face of monsters. Now, Mercy had some time and some quiet so she could proceed with the next part of her plan, which was the only thing that she had ever wanted from all of this rigmarole. She went back up to the director's office, and in the upper desk drawer, she found a phone. This was her reward. For the last 5 years, Mercy had been the patient of Dr. Ivy Williams, and I'm using the word patient pretty loosely here. Mercy was more of a study subject or a pet. Dr. Williams was very partial to strong, dominant men and women. She was also partial to breaking them, dissembling them slowly from the inside out, piece by piece, and documenting the process. The doctor never trusted Mercy enough to let her run free in the wild, but within contained conditions, she ran behavioral experiments on Mercy and would sometimes let Mercy assist in running behavioral experiments on others. The night of the long knives had been her biggest test to date. Mercy had been the site manager, the expediter, executing the doctor's plan. Then she was to wait in the facility for the DRO to come collect her and take her back into custody. If she did all of this, if she did it perfectly, then there might be some hope for her yet. When she went with Dr. Williams to her new position at Black Site 1, Mercy might not be a prisoner there, but an employee. That's what the doctor kept telling her anyway. Mercy agreed. Mercy said that she would obey, that she would prove herself. But in return, she wanted one thing, just one thing. After a little hemming and hawing, the doctor agreed, and she said, "I will do you this favor, and not because I have to and not because you demand it, but because I feel that you've earned it." Now, Mercy was sitting in the doctor's chair in the doctor's office, spattered with fresh blood. She opened that phone. The number that she had asked for was already programmed. She held her fingertip over the keypad, but she saw it was trembling, so she put the phone down. She crossed her hands in her lap, closed her eyes, focused on her breathing. 8 minutes and 11 seconds passed, and then she was ready. Then she was steady. She knew precisely because after all this time inside, she was keenly aware of every passing second. She dialed the number, turned on speakerphone, and quickly set the phone on the desk before she could notice if her hands were still shaking. The phone rang and rang and rang until... "Miss Mercy, I presume," said the old woman who answered. "I heard you wanted to talk to me, but on my word, I can't figure out why." Mercy said in a clear, calm, and controlled voice, "You may not remember me, Miss Ambrose, but I remember you." She briefly described the wisps of memory that she still had from her childhood, and of Lila Ambrose sparing her life. There was a brief silence. "I remember. That was you? Good for you. You really pulled yourself up by your bootstraps, didn't you?" Mercy looked around the blood-spattered office and down at her stolen clothes and said, "Did I? You made a name for yourself, young lady. That's much more important than you understand. People are going to remember Miss Mercy." Now, with all that said, I still don't know why we're talking. Ivy asked me for a favor in return for the live feed tonight, so here I am. Live feed? Mercy thought to herself. She looked around the room for cameras. Lila said, "Yes, I can see you. I have access to all the cameras and the drones. It is getting messy out there." Mercy said, "Miss Ambrose, this may be the only chance I ever get to talk to you. I know this is trite, and I know this is cliche, but I would like to ask you about my mother." "Sarah? What about her?" "Everything. I never knew who she was. I never knew her name was Sarah." The old woman sighed. Mercy could hear clicking in the background as Lila cycled through the camera feeds. "Really? You don't know?" "Ivy knows. She never told you?" "Clever girl like you, I assumed you would have found out. Your mother was named Sarah Whitlow. I'm sure you heard of her." Of course she had. Sarah the Skinner. She was famous. Lila said, "Sarah started off with me, with one of my groups, I should say. Sarah was a devout believer. She gave it everything she had, including you. It was a different time for all of us back then. And I demanded certain things of my followers at the time, you understand? Land, money, skin. In some cases, like with Sarah, I demanded what was in her belly. And if you want the full Lifetime movie treatment, I'll tell you that she really didn't want to give you up. But she didn't have much of a choice at that point. She did love you. I can tell you that. A few years earlier, and I would have skinned you myself, right in front of her, just to test her faith. Like I said, it was a different time. By that point, I was in a transitional period in my life. So I had you sent to another group for them to raise you. I changed my mind about what masters I served, you see? But I didn't want to show my hand yet. So I kept the cults going, the business, the skins, I kept doing all of it. Really, I was collecting intelligence. I was building my plan for the future. It's biding my time. And that's what kept you alive. It's also what chased your mom away. Sarah was a true believer. Couldn't keep her down on the ranch, you know? She needed more. She was on the dark path, wanting to follow it all the way to the island. And she saw that I wasn't the one to take her there, so she disappeared one day, took off, did some traveling, tried to find her own way to the island. Ended up in cell 6. You know why I showed you mercy, young lady? Because your mother, Sarah, never once said my name. To the law, to the DRO, to the reporters. Not once. There was another pause, but now there was no more clicking in the background. Lila was paying attention to her. Mercy could feel it. You look like her, you know? No, ma'am. I did not know that. Lila said, so what happens tomorrow? What happens to you? They pick me up when they storm the building. They'll take me into custody, send me to Black Site 1 with Dr. Williams. And this appeals to you, girl? Have they broken you down so much? Mercy said, I was born broken. All options considered, this seems like a good opportunity. Lila harumphed. Mercy, I want you to tell me something. Tell me what you think of Dr. Williams. I think she is smart enough to listen in on phone calls that might pertain to her. Lila chuckled. Maybe. Maybe not. Say she is. So what? I'm asking you, honestly, what you think of her. Right here, right now. What do you think? Well, ma'am, if I had one wish in this world, it would be to stand behind her in front of a mirror so we could both watch when I cut her throat. I would very much like to see her eyes. Lila howled. That is more like it. That Whitlow fire. I don't like that bitch either. Listen, why don't you come down to Florida? We can talk about this a little more. Mercy's pulse rose just a little. Are you being serious? Of course. You have to get here and not be followed. But you have the phone, you have my number. Call me when you get to Florida, and I'll send someone to meet you. Thank you. I will. But Lila had already hung up. Mercy stared at the phone for a minute, letting all of this sink in and debating what she should do. If she waited, if she went with the plan, she would be moved to another prison. She would stay next to Dr. Williams, assisting her to some degree. But if she left, she took a big risk. The DRO would not bring her in alive again. Of this, she was quite certain. She would have to make it to Lila Ambrose and pray that it wasn't a trap. It took 3 minutes and 16 seconds, and then she decided it was worth the risk. If she wanted a real chance of making it, she knew that she needed to get the federal marshal's ID and badge, which were currently no doubt tangled up in her remains down in the basement with the thing. In order to get that, Mercy was going to need bait. She would need a victim to distract the monster's libidinous rage while she recovered the tools that she needed to escape. Honestly, this did not sound like much of a problem at all. In another hour, 2 hours tops, she knew she would be leaving all of this behind and going south for a new life. Thanks for listening to another episode of A Scary Home Companion. If you'd like to find out what happened to Miss Mercy next, you gotta listen to Night of the Long Knives. But honestly, to get all of the dozens of references to other stories in this deep dive episode, you've got to listen to them all. Even those shaky first few. Send feedback to the show to ascaryhomecompanion@gmail.com or contact us through social media. We're on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, or you can make my day by joining the Patreon. On that note, I'd like to give a special shout out, a thank you, to Monica, one of my supporters on Patreon. I might not have ever made this episode without her prompting me. So if there's a story that you'd like to hear, Patreon is the best way to interact with us during the creation of these episodes. The recent Thanksgiving story about Obadiah Moncrief, that came at the request of patron Eric. And as a Patreon exclusive, there's a barn burner of an episode about the Vespers, a trio of sniper nuns taking on a drug cartel. And that one was prompted by patron Ashley. So thanks Monica, Ashley, and Eric. And you, come and sit at the cool kids table with them. The link is in the show notes. This story was edited and produced by Jeff Davidson. Featured a quick cameo by Savannah Hensley as Emily Mason. Music this time around was by Jahzzar with Liar. Gowns with Ghost Mercy Ribbons. Glass Candy with The Chameleon. And as always, Chelsea Oxendine with the theme music.